The winter wind howled through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, a small town tucked away in the snowy mountains of Colorado. Christmas Eve had descended like a soft blanket, wrapping the town in a peaceful glow. Snowflakes fell in gentle spirals under the dim golden lights strung along the rooftops. The entire town seemed to breathe in sync, anticipating the holiest night of the year. At the heart of Oak Ridge stood St. Mary's Church, a towering, century-old structure of stone and stained glass. Its bell tower was the pride of the community, chiming faithfully every Sunday and on holy occasions. Inside the church, the atmosphere buzzed with preparation. Candles were being arranged, poinsettias placed around the altar, and the scent of fresh pine filled the air from the massive Christmas tree by the entrance. The congregation's choir rehearsed hymns, their voices floating like fragile whispers into the high vaulted ceiling. Father Matthew, the caretaker of St. Mary's, was busy with last-minute details for the midnight mass. He was a man in his late 50s with a kind face and a quiet, steady demeanor that comforted anyone who came to him for guidance. For decades, Father Matthew had been the shepherd of this little flock, and tonight he wanted everything to be perfect. Christmas Eve at St. Mary's wasn't just a service, it was a tradition, a celebration of faith and community that brought everyone together, even those who hadn't stepped foot in a church all year. Yet, despite the preparations, there was a restlessness in Father Matthew's heart. Something didn't feel right. He couldn't pinpoint it. Perhaps it was the dream he'd had the night before, where he'd seen the church consumed in darkness, only for a faint light to appear in the form of glowing golden eyes. Shaking the thought from his mind, he adjusted his glasses and turned his focus back to his duties. Among the volunteers bustling about was Clara, a single mother in her 30s who had recently returned to Oak Ridge after a messy divorce. Her young son, Oliver, a shy but curious boy of 7, followed her like a shadow. Clara had taken on the role of helping organize the nativity play, and Oliver, dressed as a shepherd, clutched his prop staff nervously as he trailed after her. "Mom, do you think God listens to animals too?" Oliver asked suddenly, his small voice echoing in the empty pews as they passed. Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Of course, sweetie. Why do you ask?" He hesitated, his wide eyes darting to the large wooden doors of the church. I think I saw a cat watching me through the window earlier. Do you think he could talk to God?" Before Clara could answer, the heavy church doors creaked open, sending a burst of icy air through the nave. She turned quickly, half expecting to see another parishioner arriving early. Instead, a black and white cat padded in silently, its fur dusted with snowflakes. The cat was lean, with striking golden eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light of the church. It paused at the threshold, surveying the room with an air of quiet authority, as though it belonged there. Oliver gasped softly. "See, that's the one I saw," he whispered, tugging at his mother's sleeve. Clara chuckled, though a shiver ran down her spine as the cat's gaze lingered on her for a moment before it turned and slipped into the shadows of the church. "Probably just a stray looking for warmth," she said, though she couldn't shake the unease creeping over her. Father Matthew noticed the cat as well, his brow furrowing slightly. Animals occasionally wandered into the church, birds, squirrels, even the odd raccoon, but there was something different about this cat. It moved with a purpose, weaving through the pews like it knew the way. And those eyes, they seemed almost too intelligent, as if they were looking straight into his soul. "Father, do you want me to shoo it out?" asked James, the head usher, breaking Father Matthew's train of thought. "No," Father Matthew replied after a moment, his voice softer than usual. "Let it be. Perhaps it's here for a reason." As the final touches were made, the church began to fill with families, friends, and neighbors, all dressed in their holiday best. There was an air of reverence as people found their seats, children fidgeting with excitement while parents hushed them with smiles. The choir struck up "O Holy Night," their voices cascading over the congregation like a gentle wave. The black and white cat reappeared, unnoticed by most, slipping silently through the crowd and settling near the altar. Oliver spotted it immediately, nudging his mother again. "Mom, look, it's sitting by the tree." Clara glanced over and saw it sitting regally beneath the massive Christmas tree, its glowing eyes fixed on the congregation. For a moment, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, as though the cat's presence was a sign of something greater. Father Matthew stepped up to the pulpit, raising his hands to quiet the murmurs of the crowd. He began his sermon, speaking of hope and redemption, of light shining through the darkest of times. But just as his words began to flow, the doors of the church burst open with a deafening bang. Gasps rippled through the congregation as three shadowy figures entered, their faces hidden beneath ski masks. One of them held a crowbar, while another carried what looked like a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Everyone stay where you are," the tallest figure barked, his voice cold and commanding. Chaos erupted as people screamed and scrambled to shield their loved ones. Father Matthew froze at the pulpit, his hands trembling as the masked intruders advanced. The golden warmth of the church seemed to dim, as though a shadow had crept over the holy space. Amid the commotion, the black and white cat rose from its spot by the tree, its golden eyes narrowing. It moved silently, unnoticed, weaving through the panicked crowd like a specter. And then, as if sensing the shift in energy, Oliver pointed to the cat and whispered, "Mom, look, it's not afraid." The air inside St. Mary's was electric with fear. Parents clutched their children tightly, murmuring prayers under their breath, while others froze in their seats, unsure of what to do. The three masked intruders strode purposefully down the central aisle. The tallest of the three, clearly the leader, scanned the room with sharp, calculating eyes beneath his mask. "Listen up," he barked, slamming the crowbar onto the edge of a pew with a loud clang that echoed through the church. "Nobody move, and no one will get hurt. We're just here for a little donation. Call it your Christmas gift to us." The smaller of the three men, the one holding the duffel bag, laughed nervously. "Yeah, real generous of you folks." The third intruder, silent but menacing, stood near the door, keeping watch. His gloved hands rested on what looked like a gun tucked into his belt. Father Matthew stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Please, this is a house of God. Whatever you're looking for, we can talk." The leader cut him off with a sharp gesture of the crowbar. "Save the sermon, old man. We're not here to talk." He pointed the crowbar toward the donation box near the altar, stuffed full with bills and envelopes from the generous congregation. "Start with that." Two ushers moved hesitantly toward the donation box, their hands shaking. Clara pulled Oliver close, shielding him with her body as he stared wide-eyed at the unfolding scene. "Mom," Oliver whispered, barely audible. "Where's the cat?" "I can't see it anymore." Clara's eyes darted around the room. He was right. The black and white cat had vanished. Just moments ago, it had been sitting boldly near the altar, unbothered by the chaos. Now it was gone, and for reasons she couldn't explain, its absence made her uneasy. Meanwhile, the leader's patience was wearing thin. "Hurry up," he snapped at the ushers, who were fumbling with the donation box. Father Matthew's voice rang out again, firm but pleading. "Please, don't do this. This money is meant for those in need, the homeless, the hungry." "And now it's for us," the smaller man interrupted with a snicker. "We need it more." But just as the tension in the room seemed ready to boil over, a sudden sound broke through the stifling silence. It was faint at first, a soft, rhythmic thudding, almost like footsteps. Everyone froze. Even the intruders paused, their heads turning toward the source of the sound. It was coming from the back of the church, near the sacristy. "Who's there?" the leader barked, swinging the crowbar in the direction of the noise. No one answered. The thudding grew louder, more deliberate, echoing eerily in the cavernous space. Then, out of the shadows, the black and white cat appeared. It moved slowly, deliberately, its golden eyes locked onto the leader. There was something almost unnatural about the way it walked, silent, measured, as if it were stalking prey. The soft thud everyone had heard was the sound of its paws hitting the stone floor. The leader let out a sharp laugh, though there was a nervous edge to it. "It's just a stupid cat," he muttered, but his grip on the crowbar tightened. The cat stopped a few feet away, sitting down and curling its tail neatly around its paws. Its gaze didn't waver, unblinking and intense. "Shoo," the smaller man said, waving a hand toward it. "Get lost, you dumb animal." But the cat didn't move. Instead, it tilted its head slightly as if studying them and let out a single, low meow. For reasons no one could explain, the sound sent a chill through the room. It was no ordinary meow. It was deep and resonant, almost like a warning. Oliver's voice broke the silence. "It's protecting us," he whispered, his eyes shining with wonder. The leader rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the unease creeping over him. "Enough of this. It's just a cat. Let's get this over with." He took a step forward, raising the crowbar, but before he could take another, the cat let out a sharp hiss, its body arching as its fur bristled. The sound was like a crack of lightning, sharp and startling, and it made the leader stop in his tracks. "Boss," the smaller man said uneasily, "maybe we should." "Shut up," the leader snapped, but his voice wavered. The cat didn't wait for him to act. With a sudden burst of speed, it darted toward the altar, leaping onto the table with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. The motion drew everyone's attention, including the intruders. What happened next was something no one in the church would ever forget. The cat reached the altar and stood tall, its back arched and its tail high. Then, as if on cue, the candles on the altar flared brighter, their flames flickering wildly. The stained glass windows behind the altar shimmered as though lit from within, casting colorful patterns of light across the walls. A gasp rippled through the congregation as the cat let out another sound. Not a meow this time, but something deeper, almost like a growl. Its golden eyes seemed to glow brighter, and for a moment, it looked less like a simple animal and more like something otherworldly. The leader stumbled back, his face pale beneath his mask. "What the?" The smaller man dropped the duffel bag, his hands trembling. "Boss, let's get out of here. This isn't normal." Even the silent man by the door seemed shaken, his hand hovering near the gun in his belt, but not quite able to draw it. But the cat didn't attack. It simply stood there, its presence commanding, its gaze unrelenting. It didn't need to strike, it had already won. One by one, the intruders began to back away, the tension breaking as their fear overtook their greed. The leader was the last to move, his knuckles white around the crowbar. He glanced around the church, at the frightened but defiant faces of the congregation, at Father Matthew standing tall despite the danger, and finally back at the cat. Its eyes seemed to bore into him, and for a brief moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. "Let's go," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Without another word, the three men retreated, disappearing into the snowy night. As the heavy doors closed behind them, a collective sigh of relief swept through the church. People began to murmur, some laughing nervously, others weeping openly. But all eyes eventually turned back to the altar, where the black and white cat still stood. Its golden eyes softened, and it let out one final soft meow before leaping gracefully down and disappearing once again into the shadows. For several moments after the intruders had fled, silence gripped St. Mary's Church. The congregation remained frozen in their pews, unsure whether to move or speak, as though the air itself had been thickened by what they had just witnessed. All eyes kept darting back to the shadows where the mysterious black and white cat had disappeared. Father Matthew, his breath unsteady, stepped down from the pulpit and approached the altar. The candles were still flickering unusually, their flames unusually vibrant, almost alive. He scanned the dim corners of the church, his voice breaking the silence. Did anyone see where it went? No one answered. Even Clara, holding Oliver tightly to her side, found herself unable to form words. Her mind raced, replaying the image of the cat, its golden eyes burning with an unearthly intensity, the way it seemed to command the room with nothing but its presence. "It was a sign," whispered an elderly woman near the front pew, clutching her rosary with trembling hands. "That cat. It wasn't just a cat. It was sent here to protect us." The murmurs of agreement spread like ripples through the congregation. Whispers filled the air, some calling it a guardian angel, others a miracle. Clara listened, her skepticism battling with the undeniable feeling that something extraordinary had happened. She glanced down at Oliver, who was still staring at the altar with wide, wondering eyes. "Mom," he said softly, breaking the quiet hum of voices, "I think God sent the cat." Clara knelt to his level, brushing his messy hair back from his forehead. "Sweetie, I don't know what that was, but..." She paused, realizing she had no explanation. Maybe it was. As the congregation slowly began to stir and process what had happened, Father Matthew turned to James, the head usher. "Lock the doors," he said, his voice firmer now. "We need to make sure no one else can come in tonight." James nodded, hurrying to secure the church. But even as the doors were bolted and the panic began to subside, there was a lingering tension in the air. Everyone could feel it. The night wasn't over yet. As Father Matthew tried to calm the crowd, reassuring them that they were safe now, the black and white cat reappeared. It emerged from the shadows near the nativity scene, moving silently but with purpose. This time, everyone noticed. "There it is!" a child exclaimed, pointing with a mix of excitement and awe. The room fell silent once more as all eyes turned to the cat. It walked toward the altar, its tail high, pausing briefly to glance at the glowing candles before jumping onto the steps of the platform. Father Matthew approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. "What are you?" he murmured under his breath, though he knew the cat wouldn't answer. The cat sat down at the base of the altar, licking one paw casually, as though nothing unusual had happened. But then it lifted its head and fixed its golden gaze on Father Matthew, and something in his chest tightened. The priest dropped to his knees, his eyes brimming with tears. It wasn't fear. No, it was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. In that moment, he understood. This cat wasn't here by chance. It was a message, a reminder of the faith he had carried for so long, but had let grow dim under the weight of years. Father Matthew turned to the congregation, his voice trembling but clear. "My brothers and sisters," he said, "what we have witnessed tonight is not just a miracle of protection, but a call to remember the power of faith. This animal, this creation of God, was sent to remind us that even in the darkest moments, light will find its way." The crowd listened in rapt silence, their fear beginning to melt into something else. Many began to cry, tears of relief, of gratitude, of something they couldn't fully articulate. But before the mood could fully settle, a sudden knock on the heavy church doors sent another jolt of anxiety through the room. "Who could that be?" James muttered, hesitating before moving to the door. "No, wait," Father Matthew called out, rising to his feet. He turned to the cat Mard, which was now sitting at the edge of the altar steps, staring intently at the doors. Its body tensed and its ears swiveled forward. "Whatever happens, we face it together," Father Matthew said, stepping toward the doors himself. The knock came again, louder this time. The congregation held their breath as the priest slowly unbolted and opened the door. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't another intruder. Standing there in the falling snow was a young woman, shivering in a thin jacket, her arms cradling a bundle of blankets. I'm sorry," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "I didn't know where else to go." Father Matthew's eyes softened as he realized what she was carrying, a newborn baby, its tiny face peeking out from the folds of the blanket. "Come in," he said gently, ushering her inside. The woman stepped into the warm glow of the church, her eyes scanning the room nervously. I was trying to get to the shelter, but I got lost in the snow. I saw the lights here, and I thought—" She trailed off, her voice cracking with emotion. Clara moved forward instinctively, her motherly instincts kicking in. "You're safe now," she said, wrapping her coat around the young woman's shoulders. The cat, still sitting at the altar, watched the scene unfold with an almost knowing expression. It rose gracefully and padded toward the woman, sniffing the edge of the blanket before letting out a soft, approving purr. The young woman laughed through her tears. "Is this your cat?" "No," Father Matthew said, smiling for the first time that night, "but it seems to belong to all of us now." The congregation gathered around the young mother and her child, offering her food, blankets, and comfort. The mood in the church shifted completely. What had begun as a night of fear was now a night of unity and compassion. Father Matthew couldn't help but marvel at the timing of it all. The cat's arrival, the thwarted robbery, and now this. A mother and her child finding refuge on Christmas Eve, just as Mary and Joseph had so long ago. As the cat wove through the crowd, brushing against people's legs and accepting gentle pats, it seemed to radiate a quiet peace. And though no one could explain where it had come from or why it had chosen this night to appear, they all agreed on one thing. It had brought them a miracle. The night at St. Mary's Church had shifted from terror to wonder, from chaos to a quiet sense of the divine. After helping the young mother settle on a bench near the altar, wrapped in warm blankets, Father Matthew turned his gaze back to the black and white cat. It now rested on the edge of the nativity scene, curling up beside the manger like a silent sentinel. Its golden eyes, half closed, glowed faintly in the soft candlelight. The congregation, still gathered in small clusters, murmured among themselves about the events of the evening. Most of them stayed, unable to leave after what they'd witnessed. Something unspoken tied them to the church that night. A shared need to be present, to feel connected, to make sense of it all. Clara, still holding Oliver's hand, approached the young mother. "Do you have a place to go after this?" she asked gently. The woman shook her head, tears welling in her eyes again. "I don't. I left everything behind. I didn't know where else to turn. I couldn't stay where I was." She looked down at her baby, her voice breaking. "I only had him to think about." Clara felt a pang of empathy, so sharp it almost took her breath away. She thought of her own struggles as a single mother, the nights she'd cried alone after her divorce, wondering how she would keep going for Oliver's sake. Without hesitation, she placed a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. "You'll stay with us," Clara said firmly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "At least until we figure something out. You're not alone anymore." The young woman's face crumpled with gratitude, and she reached out to clasp Clara's hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her tears falling freely now. As this quiet act of kindness unfolded, Father Matthew stood before the congregation once more. The energy in the room had shifted entirely, no longer fearful, but warm, hopeful. He raised his hands, signaling for everyone's attention. "My friends," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Tonight we have seen what Christmas is truly about. It is not just a holiday, not just a time for presents or feasts, but a celebration of light conquering darkness, of love and faith triumphing over fear. And tonight, in this very church, we have been reminded of that truth in ways none of us could have imagined." He paused, his gaze drifting to the nativity scene where the cat lay curled, its presence almost symbolic now. "We were tested tonight," he continued, "by those who sought to harm us, to take from us. But we were also blessed by the arrival of this animal, this creature of God, who stood as a protector when we needed one most. And now we are blessed again by the presence of a mother and her child, seeking refuge on this holy night." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others wiping tears from their eyes. Oliver tugged at Clara's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, do you think the cat is like the angel in the Christmas story? The one who told the shepherds about baby Jesus?" Clara looked at him, her throat tightening. She didn't have an answer, but the thought made her heart swell. "Maybe it is," she said softly. As if responding to Oliver's words, the cat suddenly rose from its spot beside the manger. Stretching languidly, it walked down the altar steps, weaving through the crowd once more. This time, people reached out to touch it, their hands brushing its fur like it was a blessing. The cat didn't seem to mind. It paused beside Oliver, looking up at him with those mesmerizing golden eyes. Oliver grinned, crouching down to pet it. "Hi," he whispered. "Thanks for helping us." The cat purred in response, pressing its head briefly against the boy's hand before moving on. It continued its silent journey around the church, as if inspecting the space, ensuring all was well. Meanwhile, Father Matthew stepped down from the pulpit and approached Clara and the young mother. He placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "Miss," he said, "do you have a name we can call you by?" "Emily," she replied quietly. "And this is Noah." She glanced down at her baby, her face softening. "Emily Noah," Father Matthew said with a kind smile. "You're safe here. Tonight, this church is your home." The priest turned to James and a few other parishioners. "We'll organize some food and supplies. The shelter may be closed for the night, but that doesn't mean we can't act as one. After all, that is what community is for." The parishioners sprang into action, their fear from earlier replaced with a sense of purpose. Someone retrieved extra blankets from the storage room, while another brought warm drinks from the kitchen. A few families offered to stay and help, while others vowed to return the next day with donations for Emily and Noah. Through it all, the cat remained a quiet observer. It had settled near the entrance of the church now, sitting upright like a guardian watching over its charge. By the time the clock struck midnight, The atmosphere in St. Mary's was almost unrecognizable from the chaos earlier. The congregation, united by the events of the evening, gathered for a quiet and heartfelt prayer. Father Matthew led them in giving thanks, not just for their safety, but for the deeper lessons of the night. He spoke of courage, of the mysterious ways in which faith can manifest, and of the importance of standing together as a community. God works in ways we may never fully understand, he said, but tonight we were witnesses to his grace. As the prayer ended, Oliver leaned close to Clara and whispered, "Do you think the cat will stay with us?" "I don't know," Clara replied, watching as the cat, now sitting at the very center of the aisle, seemed to meet her gaze. "But I think it's already done what it came to do." Sure enough, as the congregation began to disperse, the cat rose to its feet once more. It walked slowly to the heavy wooden doors of the church, pausing briefly to glance back at the people who had gathered near the altar. For a moment, it seemed to look directly at Father Matthew, then at Emily, and finally at Oliver. Its golden eyes lingered on the boy, and Oliver smiled. "Goodbye," Oliver whispered, waving. With that, the cat pushed its way through the doors, disappearing into the snowy night. Father Matthew stood by the door, staring after it. "A messenger," he murmured under his breath. "Perhaps not an angel, but a messenger nonetheless." He closed the doors, the chill of the winter night sealed out once more. Turning back to the congregation, he smiled. "Let's finish what we started," he said. "Midnight Mass waits for no one." The choir began singing softly, their voices rising with renewed strength. The congregation, still moved by the night's events, joined in. The church was filled with music, warmth, and light, an enduring reminder of the miracles, both big and small, that come when they are needed most. The morning sun broke gently over the snowy streets of Oak Ridge, painting the town in hues of gold and pink. St. Mary's Church stood quiet now, its walls holding the echoes of a night no one would soon forget. Inside, the candles had burned low, their warm light casting soft shadows over the nativity scene. The scent of pine lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of melted wax. Clara sat in the front pew, cradling a cup of coffee offered by one of the parishioners who had stayed overnight. Beside her, Oliver was fast asleep, his head resting on her lap, a peaceful smile on his face. Emily and her baby Noah were nestled on a bench near the altar, both wrapped in layers of blankets donated by the congregation. Emily had fallen asleep, her face finally free of the worry that had shadowed her the night before. Father Matthew stood at the back of the church, gazing out the tall stained glass windows as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the colorful patterns. His heart felt lighter than it had in years. The events of the night played over and over in his mind, the arrival of the cat, the way it had stood unflinchingly against the intruders, and the peace it had left in its wake. "Do you think we'll see it again?" Clara's voice broke the stillness. The priest turned, smiling at her. "Perhaps," he said, "but whether we do or not, its message will stay with us." Clara nodded, her gaze drifting to the nativity scene. The empty space where the cat had rested now seemed strangely sacred. Just then, Oliver stirred, rubbing his eyes and sitting up groggily. "Mom?" he mumbled. "Yes, sweetie?" "Do you think the cat is okay, out there in the snow?" Clara smiled softly, brushing his hair back. "I think it's exactly where it's supposed to be." Oliver thought for a moment, then smiled too. "I think so too." Father Matthew approached them, his voice gentle but steady. "It's funny," he said. "Last night, when the cat was sitting by the altar, I remembered something from Scripture. Isaiah 11:6, it says, 'And the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and a little child shall lead them.'" Oliver tilted his head curiously. "What does that mean?" "It means," Father Matthew explained, "that peace comes in ways we don't expect, with sometimes through the most surprising messengers." Clara placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "Like the cat." "Exactly," Father Matthew said, his eyes twinkling. As the three of them stood in thoughtful silence, a single black and white paw print, etched into the fresh snow outside the church doors, caught Father Matthew's eye. He smiled to himself, knowing the cat's presence had been more than mere coincidence. That Christmas morning, the people of St. Mary's left the church with hearts fuller than they had been in years. The story of the mysterious black and white cat would spread through Oak Ridge, becoming a local legend, something to be retold on cold winter nights by firesides, a tale of bravery, faith, and the unexpected miracles that remind us of the goodness in the world. And though the cat was never seen again, its golden-eyed gaze lingered in the hearts of everyone who had been there that night. For some, it was a protector. For others, a messenger. But for all, it was a sign of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light finds a way to shine. The message of that Christmas Eve was clear. Miracles don't always come with grandeur. Sometimes they come in the quiet patting of paws, the flicker of a candle, or the outstretched hands of a stranger offering help. And perhaps, if we keep our hearts open, we may find that miracles are closer than we think, waiting for us in the most unexpected places.